Hey, and welcome to the second edition of Real Horror versus Real Horror. I've still not come up with a better title, but I have come up with an absolutely banging film to look at, and hopefully we can have a really good conversation about it. I'm joined by that crime guy who is handling the real life side of this, or the real life sides of this. It's a complex one. But here in this video, we're just going to talk about the film Wolf Creek. And maybe we'll also touch on the real life incidents that inspired this film and how they differ from the actual finished product. But for starters, thank you, TCG, for joining me.
Pleasure as always. Thank you for having me.
I'm just so relieved you came back after Plan 9 from outer space. That was an experience, wasn't it?
Yeah, I've got a 3-strike rule, and we're on 2 strikes after City of the Living Dead. So
I'm gonna have to fling you something like, oh gosh, I don't know, Friday the 13th Part 6, maybe Sorority Row.
Definitely Part 4. Definitely Part 4 will be all right
Definitely
with that. But
Part
no,
4.
you threw a little gem my way with
Yeah.
this one.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. So I should probably ask, like, you'd heard of Wolf Creek before, hadn't you?
I'd seen it. Yeah,
You'd
many
seen it,
years ago.
brilliant.
Yeah, just but I remembered very little of it, so it was quite nice to
Mm.
go back onto to watch it again. And given that we'd agreed to sort of like to sort of look at the real sort of story behind it as
Mm.
well, gave it that sort of extra depth or that extra level of intrigue. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was really excited when I found out that this was actually based on a real life incident for real, not in a Fargo way. It's actually
Mm.
based on real life incidents. And then I was horrified because this is grim stuff. This is a
Yeah.
really grim movie.
Well, it was actually based on 2 sort of real life events. And
Mm.
I say 2, I mean sort of loosely. So when people think of Wolf Creek and they think of, the true story behind it, you'll naturally think of Ivan Milat as
Mm.
being, I don't want to say the inspiration behind it, but there's no other way to put it. But there was
Mm.
also another sort of backpacker murder which took place in 2001 that was carried out by a guy called Bradley Murdoch. And yeah, so it was those 2 stories that
Mm.
essentially birthed Wolf Creek.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because from what I understand it, I think you're right. It's not so much that they inspired it, but they redirected the film, I think is maybe fair to say, from the director's
Mm.
comments. This was originally going to be pretty much a standard slasher, and it was learning about the cases, put a real spin on it, really took
Yeah.
it off that route and gave it the really sort of distinct feeling that it has now. And then he'd been working on it, and then it's the second case, Bradley Murdoch, gave it another, I guess you might say, jolt of momentum to get it
Yeah.
going.
Yeah, yeah, you could say that. I mean, when I was looking at this case and just before watching and as I was watching the film, the similarities are slim,
Mm.
and I was kind of thinking because they when they say sort of based on true events, you kind of think, okay, well, how based on true events are they? If I was to
Mm.
compare the accuracy of Wolf Creek and obviously the Ivan Milat um, case, I would probably say it's about as similar as Ed Gein
Mm.
and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It
Mm.
takes elements of what happened in real life and then sort of dramatizes it on screen. And they do sort of take some of the more horrific elements of what he actually did
Mm.
and put it in this film. But there are differences, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point.
Oh, definitely. Now, we before we get any further, I've got to give you bonus points instantly. You've preempted me, and you've said the 4 magic words: Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It is 4 words. Would you say
It's
3
3.
words?
It's all right.
Really?
We'll say 4. Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm not going to count the syllables now, but
You're taking on the might of Microsoft Word there, because it has a go at me every time I make it 3. Clippy's going to be on your back, man. You got to watch
uh-oh.
out.
Oh no, no.
Yeah, we're going to have to talk about the comparisons. But before we do that, we should do what we do pretty much every time we cover a movie. We should do the Pint of Guinness challenge. Would you just like to give people who haven't seen Wolf Creek the Pint of Guinness synopsis? If you were at a bar, you've ordered a Guinness, and someone asked you, "Hey, have you heard about Wolf Creek? You were talking about it, right?" How would you cover the film for them in the time it takes for your pint of Guinness to be served?
So, I mean, essentially, what Wolf Creek boils down to is it's a film where you've got three, well, I say teenagers or three young adults, 2 women and 1 guy. The 2 women, I believe, are British, and they're basically just backpacking across Australia. Um,
Mm.
so the 2 women, Liz and Christy, are with a guy called Ben. They buy a car. And then, yeah, they're traveling to, I think it's Cairns in Queensland,
Mhm.
and they're going via the Great Northern Highway. But along the way, they stop off at Wolf Creek, and the car breaks down, and then they're greeted by a seemingly nice gentleman at first, a bit of a countryman, Mick
Mm.
Taylor, who offers to fix the car. Turns out the parts he needs is at his home.
Nothing wrong with the battery. Well, lucky you shields are traveling with a bloke. Can't be too careful.
Or at his yard or whatever. So he takes
Mm.
them back to his place, but they sort of stop off and set up a campfire. And then, yeah, he gives them some water. And then the next thing they know, one of the girls wakes up and she's tied up in a shed. Her friend's being tortured. We don't know where Ben is. And it turns out Mick Taylor isn't exactly the friendliest person that they
Mm.
that they initially thought him to be.
Yeah, yeah. That is it. So to throw something at you, when I first heard about this, and this is from 2005, okay, it's a pretty low budget production, but it's an Australian original, so you're expecting a lower budget. And to be honest, in horror, a low budget isn't really a problem. Um, when I heard about this way back in 2005, which is pretty much when I first saw it, and I had not seen it since, it was really lumped in with all the torture porn movies. I was seeing it just compared to Saw and Hostel. What do you reckon to that?
I don't think it's a fair comparison.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Mm.
I Coming back to this film after so many years of when I first watched it, I was expecting it to be, again, because I've been researching the actual true crime story behind this. I, I was expecting it to be a lot more gory than what it actually was. And don't get me wrong, there's some points in it, there's some parts in it which have gore in it, have quite graphic sort of
Mm.
imagery at some points. But on the whole, I thought this was kind of tame. And so to be sort of like lumped in between your Saws and your Hostels, it doesn't seem to fit that well.
I think that's very fair. But both just that. I mean, there's so many reasons. You could say, oh, it's kind of like Hostel because you've got your young folk abroad looking for a good time and then biting off more
Yeah.
than they can chew, but they don't have any kind of failing of a moral test the way you do in Hostel, which is really sort of key to what happens because Hostel has a very specific theme about American imperialism. Um, and it's so much more grounded than Saw, which is instantly like in this very like strong scenario. It's not really grounded in the real world as much. It's not trying for gritty realism.
Hmm.
And absolutely right, the level of gore is really not comparable at all. It's a much more psychological film. So
Definitely.
it seemed wrong at the time. It seemed weird at the time. And it's an even odder label now. But I think you already came out with the perfect comparison. And by the way, folks watching, I'm so sorry that the green screen is being super weird. um, if you remember the first video, I actually had the green screen set up and then I tried to use it and it didn't work and it looked really weird. So I thought I'd give it another go and plot myself in the Overlook Hotel. And it's still being weird, but hopefully you can bear with us. Keeps it
Looks
interesting.
convincing to me.
Yeah, just enjoy my occasionally disappearing shoulders, and it just adds to the fun. I think you already named the perfect comparison for Wolf Creek. It's the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. Tobey Hooper's film has so much in common with this. You can basically map them onto each other. It would be a bit reductive, but you could easily do it because they share so many elements in common. We've got the going out into effectively the wilderness, into a very sort of industrial, well, I guess you'd say post-industrial poor area. You've got the involvement of hitchhiking, picking up a lift with someone you don't know, you've got the richer middle class youths are having fun with a local, but then they kind of start talking down to him and it sets him off, which I really liked. I know how you'll feel about this, but if you remember the glory that was House of a Thousand Corpses, I think the scene where Sid Haig's character starts pushing back on a yuppie who's mocking him. I think we all agreed that was like the best scene in the movie, right?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, maybe I just got a fondness for scenes like that. But yeah, I think so much of it maps onto the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, including what we mentioned earlier, which is it's a heck of a lot less gory than it has a reputation for, both of them. There is barely any blood in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And this is harrowing, but, for an 18, especially when you compare it to Hostel and Saw, this is very restrained.
I mean, I think what does it is the sort of psychological element, like you said earlier. That for me is what makes those two horror films horror films. It isn't the violence and the gore and it's the sense of helplessness. It's the sense of no hope. It's the fear of having no control. It's having a completely dominant antagonist going up against your protags. And I think the mental aspect of those two films is what really causes the fear, because these aren't supernatural beings with like mystical powers or spectral entities. These are just essentially normal people. And when you're being told that these events are based on things that have actually happened, regardless of how accurate the depictions are, the fact that you're psychologically priming your audience to say, right, okay, I'm watching a film that is based on true stories, so these things must have happened. Therefore, oh my God, these poor victims, that the horror that they must have gone through. You're thinking about all these things, and yeah, I mean, if you know what you're looking for when it comes to what these stories were based on, again, it just adds another layer to it that, I don't know, like that Scream. Well, actually, Scream's a poor comparison because that was based on loosely based on true events, and I say loosely, very loosely.
Yeah.
But I mean, I Know What You Did Last Summer, for example. That's just a standard slasher film. There's nothing, to my knowledge, that it's based on. It's just a rip off of Scream, really, in some respects.
I think Freddie Prinze Jr. did murder and bury a body, but I think it was a family rather than a single person. So I think that's what
why he's not been
inspired
around.
it. Yeah.
Right. That's why we've not really seen him since Scooby-Doo. Gotcha.
Yeah, as you say, I Know What You Did Last Summer is very much pitching itself as quite standard. Very much it's in the language of I am a film. Whereas Wolf Creek does go for a lot of realism. You spend the first 20 minutes And I was wondering, is it indulgent how long they spend on the build up to them getting to Wolf Creek? And then on this viewing, I really appreciated it. Like, there's lots of bonding time, which admittedly you could do shorter and more concisely, but it's also that they were trying to work in how isolated they were by just sort of
Mm.
how long it takes to get to Wolf Creek. And I
Yeah,
thought
yeah,
that was quite subtle, quite clever that they did that.
yeah. I mean, Australia is a big
Mm.
place.
Mm.
Well, his name's Ben Mitchell, Phil Mitchell's son, basically. That's how I remember it.
Oh dear. There's an interesting vibe going on where Ben is kind of like the big life of the party guy. He's the big sort of,
Mm.
I guess, macho, adventurous influence at the start when they're at parties, when they're at the beach. Um, but then as they're getting into the outback, they sort of contrast him with a load of other dudes who are, I guess, dominating him. Like he goes
Mm.
into the bar and they intimidate him. And then he meets Mick Taylor, and Mick really has the upper hand on him.
Yeah.
It's I thought that was really done quite nicely and just quite subtly, just getting the impression they're out of their depth.
Absolutely, and especially someone like Ben, who was an Australian native, because I think he says he's from
Mm,
Sydney. You know, he is definitely out of his element. You know, he's just a young city boy who thinks he's the big I am. Because interestingly, like you mentioned,
mm,
that scene where they where they're in that bar very quickly,
mm,
momentarily, or the petrol station, whatnot, and when they leave, he then starts to talk big. You know, he's like, oh, I should have, oh, what is he? I should have Tai Chi'd their ass or something like that. Or, but like even he doesn't confront the men. I mean, at
mm.
most he mutters something under his breath, but then when they confront him, he's like, actually, I meant it's a nice smile you have, or something like that.
Yeah, he
You know,
backs down. Yeah,
and then he gave it the big I am when no one was around.
yeah. I like that. I mean, that felt very authentic. That he was just someone who got very out of his element.
Yeah,
Um, it's
but
quite
it
hard
got me
done
think.
by later on, though. Is it? Oh, sorry, mate. Go ahead. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I was just thinking. It kind of got me thinking though how like how I would have handled that situation, and
Mm,
because I'm not that you can see me, but I'm not exactly the biggest guy or whatnot. I mean,
mm,
could it's easy to say, oh no, I would have done this or I would have done that, but one thing it did do is it made me think how I would handle a situation like that if I knew I was outnumbered and these people were just being dicks. Basically, would I have just
mm.
ignored it and moved on, or would I have taken a good old kick in just to try and stand up for? Well, yeah, essentially, it's just words in it. I mean,
Mm,
but it got me thinking. At least they went out to intimidate the girls and Ben,
mm.
and I think that was probably all they were looking to do.
Oh, definitely, definitely. But it was nicely timed, I think, to just put a little bit of anxiety to really
Mm,
get you the feeling like you're in uncertain territory round here, basically.
absolutely, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Oof. I mean, speaking of the banter, I think the film hinges. Well, you might disagree with me. I feel like the film basically hinges 100% on Mick Taylor. Like
how so?
everything, I I got almost all my enjoyment in the film from Mick Taylor. If he hadn't had the kind of quality bants, easygoing, extremely high charisma when
Yeah,
he meets them,
yeah,
then manages to turn on the threat a little bit when he's mocked, and then keeps that same charisma, that same banter when he's torturing them.
mm,
I mean, that's a difficult thing to play, and I think he played it amazingly. You can see
yeah,
why
oh
they've just had
definitely.
the same guy come back over and over and over. It's
Yeah, yeah, a lot of if you watch it, if you look at a lot of reviews, or if you sort of see like
mm,
comments on like YouTube pages or whatnot, a lot of people will say that the guy who played, I think his name's John Jarrett,
Yeah.
He they praise the heck out of his portrayal of Mick Taylor,
Mm.
and I completely agree. Given what you said, I agree with. Um, the film is sort of heavily centered around him,
Yeah.
and he's not carrying it, but you know, he has to be he has to be a convincing kind of antagonist, and he just does it with the level of sort of it, with just the level of
Mm.
wickedness that he has about him, like the way that he's able to just sort of hide this evil persona and gain the
Mm.
trust of these individuals, and then just on a dime
Yeah.
turn it.
Where you from, mate?
Sydney.
Poof, the capital of Australia. Ah, just playing with you, Tiger. Never been over there myself.
It's this really wonderful, unsettling thing of you like the guy. He's making the same kind of jokes. You almost like him
Yeah.
and want to laugh at his jokes, even when
Mm,
he's being absolutely evil. Like it's because it's the same guy. He's just redirecting his I guess redirecting his intention. He does
yeah.
so many movies would flip it so that his charisma is like a mask that he takes off
Mm,
and he'd suddenly be super serious grizzled dude.
yeah.
And I don't think the film would be as interesting at that point because
No.
I'd say things get a tiny bit ropey once it is in the second half and you've sort of had the reveal that you can't trust him. Um, and I really relied on him there to be if he'd just been a sudden super serious bad guy, I
Would have been a bit boring.
yeah, I wouldn't have gone for it as much.
Well, nothing happens when the bolt's open, you see. Uh-oh.
It's like when he references the conversation he had with Ben at the campfire and the girls when
Mm,
when Ben starts to sort of like mock him a bit. And he's, oh, it must be nice having the freedom, you're saying that this ain't, you call that a knife? This is a knife. And then he sort of, and then
mm,
he literally says that, oh, it's like your mate said back earlier. When like the little, I think her name's Christy, she pulls out
yeah.
that little pen knife, and he's like, oh, it's like your mate said, that's not a knife. And then he pulls out his big old blade. This is a knife. It's like,
I think that's like a
brilliant.
risky moment because it is
Yeah, yeah.
a bit. It's kind of memey, but I think it works. It has earned
It
it,
worked
by
for
that
me. It
point.
works because just everything else,
Yeah.
the actress who, her terror is absolutely believable in that moment,
Mm,
and the way that John Jarrett really, just got Mick's character to just really sort of come across as someone who's really reveling in that horror, in that terror, and
mm.
because of his enjoyment of that, it really sort of resonates with the viewer to say, yeah, this guy's someone who gets off on it.
There is a moment that, and this is going to sound really bad, but because obviously disavow the actions, disavow, but it was funny. He's got Christy tied up. He comes back in, and I am not condoning this, but he's having fun tormenting her, and he
Yeah,
says, "Now, don't you worry. I always use rubbers with you, townies. No one knows where you've been." And it's sort of,
yeah,
oh, it's such dark humor, but he's having a right laugh with it, and
that's it. Yeah,
his charisma is still working, and that's what it's such a sort of unsettling experience.
well, that's what I'm saying. It's like
Yeah.
it's like a genuine for the character that there's a genuine sense of enjoyment for what he's about to do, and that
Mm,
is again where the psychological horror wins in this moment, because if you look at characters like Michael Myers or Jason, they're quite emotionless, but they have a
mm,
mission, and they go out and they do it, but there's no real emotion to it. Even characters like Ghostface, or
mm,
other sort of like slasher horror, from other slasher films, they just they go out there to get the job done, but there's no sense of
mm,
enjoyment as such. They're just doing it to essentially move the plot along. But with Mick,
mm.
you know, he's enjoying it, and he's letting you know he's enjoying it, and he's saying things that he knows will get a reaction out of his victim, which in turn heightens the enjoyment even more. And
Mm.
it's just disavow, but it's just brilliant.
Oh, it is. I mean, there's an older film called Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. Any Guardians of the Galaxy fans, if you want to lose any love for Michael Rooker, check that one out. And it's a similar vibe. Henry and his crime partner are these. Well, his crime partner a lot more, but they're really quite charismatic, whilst they're really enjoying torturing, and it's a
Mm,
weird experience. And it's played very differently to. I think we got to get this dynamic down. It's it's a serious scene with the charisma being played, I guess, for real, versus something like any of the Chucky movies, especially later ones before the reboot. Well, yeah, let's just say sort of second to fourth Child's Play, or later Nightmare on Elm Street ones,
okay.
where the comedy is meant to say, hey, this is all a bit of fun. We're all having a laugh here. I'm
Mm.
going to do a grisly, silly murder, and I'm going to drop an Arnie pun. All right? That kind of vibe. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's a distinct difference though, isn't there, between what Mick's doing and what like your
mm,
Chuckies or those kind of characters, because it's almost like a self-awareness. Like here for
mm,
me is what the difference is. When Chucky or Freddy are busting out one-liners,
mm,
those one-liners, those moments of humor, they're like fourth wall breaks. They're for the audience.
mm.
Mick's not doing that. There's no fourth wall breaking here. He is
Oh,
aiming his humor and his comedy, dark humor at his victim, and it's solely for that victim to take in.
th- that that puts it perfectly. That
Mm,
that has got it absolutely right. That's the best way of framing it, I think. Something that was kind of alarming. You don't often see sexual violence in horror because it does tend to sort of. I mean, maybe I'm projecting here, but in my own experience, I find that when you get sexual violence in, it becomes kind of hard to enjoy the horror in a sort of light-hearted way. Like,
I get
yeah,
it.
chainsaw someone's face off. We can all have a good time with that. Everyone likes that.
Yeah,
You get the sexual violence, or you hurt animals. It's sort of like, ooh,
yeah.
it's hard to enjoy as light entertainment.
Mm.
And I did find it quite shocking that they brought that into this. Um, it's very believable, but
Uh,
the idea that he
again,
was going to sort of go that way with Christie was quite tough to take.
yeah, I get it. Uh, Having sort of done some background work on the real case, though, I mean, there was elements of that with all the victims, male and female. So
Progressive.
yeah, mm,
I should edit
yeah.
that out.
So I can see why, if again, whether that was intentionally kept, that part of Mick's character was to sort of lean on that sort of true element of what like Ivan Milat did,
Mm,
then I'm not surprised that it was in there. I again, I am surprised that it did. If anything, actually, I'm surprised it didn't go as far. I'm surprised it didn't go far enough. And what I mean by that is the film itself is trying to base itself on some truly horrific crimes,
mm,
and I felt like this film, especially with like the horror, the gore side of things, kind of held back. And so
mm,
the fact that he was sort of stopped short of doing anything too harsh
mm.
kind of didn't catch me off guard as such, but I was I was surprised that they didn't take it to that next level of psychological horror.
Okay.
Relieved. Don't get me wrong. I'm like you. I don't enjoy that sort of stuff either in films. I think it does take away, but just purely from a how far are they going to go sort of
Mm.
conversation. I I'm kind of glad that they didn't go as far enough as they did, but I was surprised. I was expecting the worst, and I was kind of relieved that I didn't get that.
Okay. Okay. So the real life crimes are a lot more than we saw in this.
Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, when they actually describe what happened to the victims, they don't tend to go into too much detail, other than the well, they do go into detail, but one thing that was made very apparent was that the it was prolonged, and
Mm.
it there was a whoever, well, obviously we know who was doing it, but the person or persons responsible
Mm.
during the investigation, they were like, yeah, they're enjoying what they're doing, or he's enjoying what he's doing.
Mm.
One of the things that they commented on the vast majority of the victims was that, and they did this in the film. They did it to Liz, but he did it to Liz.
Mm.
Was that he would sever the spines, paralyzing them.
Yeah, I found that memorable.
Yeah,
That
and
stuck with me.
do you know what's really interesting about that as well is you don't actually see Liz die. The
No.
the severing of the spine is the last thing that we see of her. So for all we know, at the end of the film, she could still be alive. And he mentions to, I think it was Christy, because she sees like another sort of a corpse hanging on the wall, and he sort of
Mm.
mentions that one lasted for a few months before he got tired of it. So
Yeah, you get the hint of that. There was also a deleted scene that would have given a tiny bit more detail.
right,
It was cut out for time, but effectively there was about a 4-minute sequence where Liz was hiding and was searching around, and found basically fell into a pit where he'd been chucking bodies.
right,
Um, there's a thing where she'd got hold of a pistol and then she had to duck into the pit and she lost the pistol in the pit of the bodies, but it it was there to show you a whole pile of them and get you the feeling of how many people he was doing this to.
yeah. I mean, to be fair, you kind of get that impression from the scene where she finds all the video cameras.
The video cameras, the number of
Yeah,
cars. I
mm,
really liked the video camera scene. I
yeah,
thought that was brilliant. That was a
yeah,
very good touch, you know?
yeah, yeah. Again, without going into it it it's horrific, but not in the sense of actually showing you horrific things. Like
Mm.
it's just it's all in the mind. It's all mental imagery that it's creating,
Mm.
and that's really powerful. It really works.
Just when you were mentioning that we never find out what happens to Liz and she may have carried on living, because at the end we don't see Mick Taylor die. He sort of wanders off and fades, and there's the implication that he's just this menacing presence that
Mm,
carries on in the outback. Because as he says, when they get there, there are abandoned places all over the outback, thousands of them. And this guy could basically just disappear if he wanted to.
yeah,
Um, but they do a little weird thing that's it stood out as weird to me. They do the credits on screen for what happened afterwards,
yeah,
which is interesting because they do say this is based on a real case and real events, but then they're giving the sort of epilogue text for the very fictional version
definitely. Yeah,
rather than resolving it, which was sort of an odd
yeah.
choice.
So yeah, it's quite interesting to see how the film ended, because one of the big differences of this film compared to obviously the true story is that there is closure. The bad guy gets his comeuppance, whereas in this movie that doesn't happen. The protagonists are. Uh, One of the things that this film does is it gives you a sense of hopelessness, and I mentioned this earlier. The protagonists are definitely out of their depth, and they are in a helpless situation. And it just sort of leans into that realism, because at the end you've got Mick Taylor surviving. He isn't caught, and yeah, the bad guy wins basically.
And it is very rare to see that in a movie for the bad guy to win. I mean, not unheard of.
Hmm.
There are examples where the bad guys won. Quite well-known ones like Nightmare on Elm Street,
Yeah,
Saw, Drag Me to Hell, Selma. So it does happen, but um,
but not often
I,
enough.
not often enough. It's nice to have it there as a threat to sort of shake you up a bit, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so talking about some of the pacing issues, we've praised this a lot, but I do think we should maybe be. I do have some critical complaints to make of
Okay.
it. So this is kind of a common complaint, but the build up is quite lovely.
Hmm.
Horror does tend to struggle sometimes when you have to you built the pressure and then you have to slap the button. And I do think Wolf Creek gets a little bit messy
Okay.
once a button's been pressed, once we've had the reveal. It has quite a few moving parts that I think it does struggle to use. How can I say? Use optimally.
Okay.
If I haven't phrased that well, we find out that they've all been drugged
Yeah.
and they wake up dazed and separated. And we get the wonderfully harsh thing of Liz becomes basically our focal point character.
Yeah.
She's on her own. She has a sort of fairly brutal way of getting out of her restraints. She then finds out like the focus of the action becomes on Mick tormenting, torturing, and threatening to violate Christy.
Yeah.
So we get a bit concentrated there, but the parties often get quite split up and sent all over the place, and it does get a bit hard to follow them. Like Ben really does sort of drop out of the movie quite a bit.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. I mean,
Mm.
well, he only wakes up towards the end, doesn't he? And
Mm.
he's never really in any danger.
No, no, he's just out on his own in the shed with the dogs. Um, Given quite a memorable, how can we say, setup? Like he's basically crucified.
Yeah.
I could nitpick what the effects of that restraint would be on him, but that would be a nitpick, so we can skip over it. He he would have some breathing issues, like quite severe ones, I think, even just being there a few hours. Um, but maybe that would be a nitpick. But it's quite weird that you focus on Christy and Liz so much, and then they're basically dispatched, and we
Mm,
get back to Ben, and then Ben gives us our happy ending. I should
he
really
does.
rephrase that, but I'm not
No,
going
don't
to.
rephrase. No, stick to your guns.
All right.
We know what you really meant.
There's a family-friendly stream, TCG.
Exactly.
Family-friendly.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, it's just a little dissonant. It's a little jarring
Yeah.
that he drops out of the film and then he's there to get effectively the good ending. And it's like,
Mm,
but most of my investment was with Liz and then Christy.
yeah. And it's weird as well,
Mm,
because Liz, like you say, becomes the focal point of the film
mm.
once she comes around from being drugged, and she's the first one to go as well.
Yeah.
So like, when you think of protagonists, you'd think, okay, Liz is going to be, because you always have that final girl in horror
Mm,
films, don't you? And you kind of in your mind you're thinking, or in my mind I'm thinking, right, she's going to be the final girl. It's going to Mick versus Liz, and it's going to go 1 or 2. Nope, she's gone, and it's quite sad how she goes,
mm,
um, but it's also quite disappointing about how easy it was for Mick eventually. Um, because
mm,
once she was gone, I thought, right, okay, well, she presented the biggest threat to Mick, because she'd already got one over on him on a couple of occasions. Christy was already, badly injured, and not in the right frame of mind to cope in that situation. And of course, as you
Mm.
say, Ben was just he just wasn't there. So yeah, it was odd. Again, you can debate whether that works or not, but
Mm.
I just thought it was interesting that they would take out the final girl first, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it gave the surprise, and the Wolf Creek isn't super typical. It does
Mm.
dash your hopes a couple of times, which is quite interesting. Um, it does a lot of things that aren't standard. And I think that's possibly Greg McLean, the director, trying to get away from maybe the original standard slasher script he'd written. So that's why you get
Mm.
the final girl oft, and then your second girl oft. You get the hope raised and dashed, but little things to connect our protags again could be helpful. Like I would wonder, maybe you would have benefited from a scene where Liz finds Ben and is unable to help
Yeah,
him, just to remind you,
yeah,
like, okay, that's where he is. That's where he is in the camp. She's seen him, but she can't help him. She's going to get out of there. Maybe he does something like he tells her to run, and he'll make a massive ruckus to try and draw
yeah,
the guy
yeah,
over. Something I had a little trouble buying was, we get the sense of the massive outback, the like huge vast space, right?
mm.
And it seems like you can disappear into it, but Mick can find you very quickly.
Yeah,
I had a
yeah,
little trouble believing that it was so easy to find them again.
yeah. It was almost kind of like teleporty, really. That's what I
It
felt.
had a little touch of that Jason Takes Manhattan teleportation.
Yeah,
Little
yeah.
bit, little bit.
And like, the
Mm.
outback is huge. From what I've been told. Obviously I've never
Mm.
been to Australia, but I've got family who live out there, and I've got family who have recently returned from Australia. And yeah, they'll tell
Mm.
you that it's easy to get lost in. And
Mm.
if you want to go missing, that then all you do is you just head inland. And yeah, it's kind of weird how he finds them so quickly. But then yeah, when I was, as I say, when I was watching it, I kind of got like teleportation vibes.
Yeah, that was the bit that I would say is maybe a weak point of the film. He tracks Christy down when she's run off. She's off on her feet. She's not in a car, so she's not following tracks, and he still gets her. I mean, maybe we'll
Yeah,
talk about that scene a bit more in a second. The scene where Kirsty and Liz have got in his truck and they've driven off, and then they manage to stop just before the truck goes off a cliff.
that's right. Yeah,
I wasn't a huge fan of that. I don't know how you felt about that. Like, that was maybe stretching it a bit, that they managed to avoid an accident in the dark there, and then their decision to just destroy the truck, um, to throw him off the scent. That felt a lot less realistic. I don't know if I'm nitpicking again there.
I don't know. I mean, I didn't have too much of a problem with it. I mean, it's a high octane situation,
Mm.
and again, you've got two young women who are going up against this this huge guy who knows the surrounding, knows the and knows the
Mm.
area really well. I think it would have been a bit more ridiculous if they were able to like outrun him, or suddenly out of nowhere they can navigate the terrain better than he can, and they start getting the
Mm.
upper hand on him. It's sheer
Yeah.
luck in that scene that you talk about where they're hiding in the dark, and he sort of like starts to walk off.
Mm.
But then they start making quite a bit of noise, and he doesn't pick up on that.
Yeah.
That's something
That
I
was
found
that was
weird.
that was driving
It was
me
just
a
like,
bit mad.
Jesus Christ, like when like slams, like smacks the
Yeah,
car, and I'm like, shut up. He's
it's not
not
that
that
far
far
away,
away.
bro. I know Harrian would have been losing it over the bit where she's just managed to actually shoot Mick in the throat
Yeah.
and take him down, and then she doesn't go for any kind of kill shot. She's She
Well, I
clubs
don't
him on
think.
the back a bit, and then she goes like, "Nah, it'll be fine."
Yeah, that's because. But that's because she couldn't reload the gun.
Yeah,
Yeah, she was
but
struggling to
in
reload it. But even
waifu
then,
was
oh my
right
god,
next to me. Waifu was like, "He's got a knife. Stab him."
yeah. Well, no, even or at the very least, smack him over the head repeatedly
Mm.
with the gun. She's just lightly tapping him on the back. It's like, no, you smash his head in, cave
And
it in,
that maybe we're just genre savvy, and
maybe.
we've learned from Scream, like the killer gets
Yeah.
up again. But it drove me a bit mad, to be honest. These are nitpicks of a film that I really enjoyed. Thought was very effective.
Yes, same.
Um,
But that bit did annoy me though, when she's just like batting him on the back, and I'm like, oh no,
yeah,
no, you're doing it all wrong.
but I liked what they did. The
Oh,
time
I did too.
spent with the whole group, and I found the Ben and Liz romance like very understated and quite lovely.
Mm.
Um, I really liked that. It didn't take things over, but it was nice and believable.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I
Christy
like
just
that. Yeah.
telling him basically like, because there is some minor drama that he might have a girlfriend back in Sydney,
Oh, okay.
and I liked how undramatized it was.
Mm. It
Like
it all
it,
felt very casual, didn't it?
yeah. I mean, it's shot in this very sort of. I mean, I'm remembering it's mostly kind of light handheld, informal way. The whole film,
Mm.
so it feels very natural. Then some of the times where I felt it was stylized were some shots when they arrived at Wolf Creek, and you get a very handheld camera that is deliberately shooting from the right angle to look like it's mixed POV as he's looking in the
Right.
car. And that shooting style, I'll show the clips here, but that really stood out to me because it was very different to the rest of the film. And I quite
Mm.
liked that. Just to give you the feeling of, oh, someone's there, someone is looking, rather than
Yeah.
just it's a new angle. I thought that was nice,
Yeah.
but it understated other things. Um, so I really enjoyed that.
But yeah, I mean, understated is quite a good word, especially when it
Mm,
comes to the main characters. Because I think going back to what we said earlier, I think that the film is carried, probably the wrong word,
mm.
but Mick Taylor is the focal point of this film for me.
Yeah, you cast the wrong guy for that, and it becomes silly. He just looks cartoonish, like some of the stuff he's doing, where he's having to deliver a lot of dialogue.
Mm.
And so high potential for it to go wrong and look silly. And instead he gets the charisma just right so that even when he's angry with them and he talks, about what he does to Liz, and it's the old
Mm.
head on a stick thing.
Oh, head on a stick. That's another thing that was
Oh,
referenced as well.
yeah,
Um, but yeah,
yeah.
so just sort of touch on that. When I heard that, I was like, yeah, okay, that was something that was brought up during the investigation. So one of the leads that came through while Task Force Air, which was the name of the task force for the
Mm,
for the backpacker murders, the wife of a constructor, like a worker,
mm,
had raised concerns about this one guy called Peter Miller. Peter Miller, we later find out, is actually Richard Milat, who is Ivan's brother. And
oh,
he was saying things along the lines of, "I know how to like cutting women is like cutting a loaf of bread. I know where the bodies are. There's more of it. There's more out there." He was like, uh, he even sort of apparently said to
mm,
some of his colleagues that there were German, like they haven't found the German girls yet, or the German victims yet,
mm.
and like nobody even knew about the German victims. So that was worrying. But then he also said that he also knew how to like put a woman's head on a stick, and that then ties into the severing of the spine, because he's
Mm.
like, oh, that's what you are, just a head on a stick. And that's what happened to the majority of the victims in the actual real life Ivan Milat case. Now, you'll notice I mentioned Richard and not
Mm.
Ivan. The reason
I
for that,
picked up that there are a lot of brothers, and there was some rather
yeah,
deviousness. Like they were kind of all quite
14.
devious.
So yeah, there's 14. There's 14 siblings, 10 boys, 4 girls. Of the 10 boys, 7 of them had run-ins with the law. Um,
Mm.
Now, with the exception of Boris Malat, all of the others believe that Ivan did nothing wrong. They believe he
Mm.
blamed, they innocent. Boris is the only one who sort of spoke publicly and said, "No, no, my brother, my brother done it, and
Mm.
that he should be ashamed of himself." Um, but when they arrested Ivan, they carried out searches on Ivan's property. They also searched Richard's and his other brother Walter or Wally, and they'd
Mm.
actually found like ammunition. They'd found guns in all 3 of the properties. But more disturbingly, they also found property that belonged to the victims in all 3 of the homes. And
Mm.
there has been a long-standing theory that Ivan Milat didn't operate alone.
Mm.
In fact, even the judge, when he convicted Ivan Milat, was like, it's inevitable that there are going to be other people who were involved in this. Many people believe that Richard and Walter had something to do with it. Of course, they deny all and any wrongdoing.
Mm.
Um, and even Boris, actually, to be fair, Boris himself, even though he is convinced that Ivan was responsible for the murders, he doesn't believe that there was anybody else involved. He doesn't believe Richard or Walter had anything to do with it. He doesn't believe that they're
Mm.
capable of doing it. So if there was anybody else involved, he imagines it might have been someone like an associate of Ivan's. But yeah, he doesn't think anyone else within the family would have done anything like that. Interesting that a bunch of their stuff ends up in their homes, and
Yeah. Mm.
and they also provided alibis for Ivan, which include just like saying he was with them when he wasn't. The Walter's
Mm.
wife even doctored dates of their photo albums to make it look like he was with them one Easter when actually he wasn't. it's
Yay!
uh, it's definitely sus
Oh, nice.
behavior. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
sus
just a bit.
behavior. Mm,
Oh dear, dear. Yeah, so the quite big difference here from where Wolf Creek, where Mick is very much
yeah,
just he's explicitly a loner. He's a lone guy.
yeah,
He's off, versus possibly some very sinister family connections.
yeah. Allegedly,
Allegedly
allegedly,
in
but
Minecraft.
I say the official narrative that Ivan was
Mm.
a lone killer, but everyone who has investigated the case, and I say even the judge himself, like they are absolutely convinced that other people were involved. I think they're still finding bodies. Whether they're tied to Ivan or not is
Mm.
the official is 7, but they definitely think he was responsible for many more, and
Mm.
that kind of alludes into sort of Mick Taylor, because you can see that he's responsible for a hell of a lot of people's deaths, from the bodies that you actually see there to the the home camera footage.
Yeah.
He's obviously been doing it for a long time.
Was there anything in the film that made you think strongly of the other case, the Bradley Murdoch case?
Not particularly. I'll be honest, I haven't really looked into that one too much. Um,
That's cool.
primarily
I mean,
because I think the initial screenplay for Wolf Creek was written in 1997,
mm,
and the other murder took place in 2001. So I think the screenplay was sort of slightly tweaked during that
my
time, just to sort of,
my guess would be that there was maybe some adjustments to bring it up to
but
current
yeah,
trends a bit, but otherwise just maybe Bradley
but when it
Murdoch's
yeah
case has got some attention on that, and then he's able to say, "Look, I've kind of got a film along these lines."
yeah,
Maybe it
but with
was the impetus to get it made. Maybe.
Yeah, but with maybe possibly, but with Mick Taylor, John Jarrett said that he tailored his character heavily on Ivan. Like,
Mm.
I think he said that he'd go out into the outback and he wouldn't shower for weeks and stuff like that. He would,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm
I
sure
mean,
people
he would,
loved it. It's
yeah, method acting. I think he went in.
very, yeah, not showering for weeks. It's more like meth head acting, pretty
Yeah,
much. It blows my mind a little that there are 2 additional movies and a TV adaptation that follows on
okay,
from them, as I believe. Like,
right,
I've got to say, I enjoyed this. For me, though, it's a bit of a one and done. Even
yeah,
though John Jarrett returns in all of them, and frankly, good because it's hard to imagine anyone else playing Mick Taylor. Um,
yeah,
kind of like that Robert Englund factor is I really only want to see Freddie played by Robert Englund.
yeah,
I do struggle to think how they got that much more out of the premise, but kudos to them for managing it.
definitely, definitely. But
Yeah.
no, I agree. I think this is a very much a one and done job for me.
Yeah, definitely. It's a much better film than people might expect. I think lumping it in with torture. I mean, even as someone who defends torture porn a lot, I would say this is a really unfair classification. It really should be put alongside something like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or
Mm,
Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. Those are the vibes I get from it. It's a much more measured, it's a much more studied, it's a much more challenging horror. You could risk it's not full funny games, but there's a little bit of
oh
funny
God,
games
yeah,
energy.
yeah.
Little
Do you
bit
know
in
what?
there.
Actually, as we were having this conversation and we were thinking of films to
Mm,
compare it to, with especially with films where the antagonists sort of get the one up, I was funny games that creep into my mind. Actually,
yeah.
that's a good comparison in that
And
regard.
Eden Lake as well, I think
Yeah,
is a very good comparison.
anyone who hasn't seen this, give it a go and then sort of compare it to something like Saw or Hostel,
Mm.
and you'll see the horror that this film has is vastly different to those kinds of films. It really isn't torture porn at all. It's for me, it's more of a psychological horror.
I would probably round it off about now. Are there any sort of closing thoughts you had on Wolf Creek? Or
Um,
have we kind of just done our closing thoughts?
I suppose so. I mean,
I think we might have.
a couple of other differences I just want to sort of highlight was
Oh,
that
please, please.
Ivan Milat only well he went for hitchhikers. That's how he got his victims. He didn't sort of pick them up on the end of the road on a
Mm,
broken down car. It wasn't, and I think that was all set up anyway um,
mm,
by the people at the station. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, he would go for hitchhikers, not people in broken down cars, and he never went for more than 2 people that we know of, at least, which was a
mm.
big difference because obviously this film has 3 victims. Yeah, he never did that.
I gotta say,
Uh,
I do massively prefer that the plot is that he sabotages the car. I
mm,
like that a lot more than if he was just picking them up as hitchhikers.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I enjoy that a lot more. I think that's better
Mm.
plotting.
And it kind of does open up for sequels to again have that sort of Texas Chainsaw element in it, have almost like a family of people in on the in on the crime.
Mm. But then compare it to Texas Chainsaw Massacre is like even more impetus to make it like one and done because those
Exactly.
sequels
Yeah.
get very, very messy very quickly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I suppose closing question: would you recommend Wolf Creek, and if so, who would you recommend it to?
I would recommend it, and I would recommend it to people who prefer their psychological horrors as opposed to gore schlock, if you will. It's a good, solid film. Mick Taylor's performance is cracking. He's easily the best character in this film, even though you don't want him to be. Uh, yeah, I mean, I just remember when they're sitting around a campfire and he's all jolly and having a laugh, and I was just sitting there, I was like, oh man, It sucks that he's going to turn bad because he's so cool.
I
Don't be
know,
bad.
right?
Oh, don't be bad.
Don't hate the
Yeah, no,
player, hate the game.
I'd recommend it to people who like to think their way through horror and sort of think what to do in those sorts of situations, and really trying to sort of put themselves in the shoes of the of the people sort of undergoing the ordeals and thinking, what could they do to get have them thinking. I think it's a thinking man's horror movie.
It's not a quick slasher. It's not
No.
Hatchet. It is asking you to invest a lot more. So that should be a good guide as to whether Wolf Creek is right for you, even though we pretty much just spoiled the whole movie.
Oh, yeah,
So,
spoilers.
spoilers. Okay, well, I think that's about everything for our discussion of Wolf Creek from 2005. I hope you found it interesting, and I would definitely advise check out that Crime Guy's video on the real life crimes that inspired this film. And thanks again to TCG for coming on Real Horror versus Real Horror.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a really enjoyable chat. And yeah, as I said, if you want to know more about the real life situation, come and check me out.
Yeah, I mean, if you're on this channel, you will know TCG already. I don't know if you're just like a random, really big Wolf Creek fan who's happened across this, but if you know my channel, you will know that Crime Guy from my Thursday live streams. So if you haven't gone and checked out his videos and subscribed already, what are you waiting for? The guy's fantastic. Really does the research. So, and you will see that if you watch his video about the real life Ivan Milat. Hopefully this has got you interested in it. We are planning more real horror versus real horror. The next one is either going to involve a dinner party or alligators. Could go either way on this one. We'll see. Why not? Porque no los dos.
I need to. Wow, that is a bit of a juxtaposition right there.
How else am I going to sell it? Well, you'll
Absolutely.
see on the next exciting episode of Real Horror versus Real Horror. That's all from me. Thanks, y'all. Cheers.